Labor and materials costs have just skyrocketed in recent years. It's actually amazing as to what you were paying for work on these cars, even 5 years ago versus today. So what I try and go over is stuff that possibly can be done if you really want to save some money, or if you're just interested in learning and doing the stuff on your own vehicle without a lot of collateral damage. And when I say collateral damage is, even when repairs come up on my own cars, I always have to weigh everything. So if it's gonna be an engine out job, and I'm gonna take it on here, there's always a possibility of making a mistake, and I make a lot of mistakes. Therefore, it could cost me more in time and money in the end. So I always have to weigh that versus the cost of just sending it out. This, I would advise, would be a good strategy for you as well. And another good thing is call around to the dealers. Shop, because the dealers' pricing vary greatly. And also too, that'll give you an idea of whether or not it's something you might want to take on yourself and keep doing it in the future, or just send it out. If money is no object, then definitely you would just always want to send it out. Specifically, most likely to the dealer would be the best rate. But in any case, what I'll do is go over some of this stuff, so possibly maybe it will help you. And specifically in the Murci, what we'll do today is take a look at the front and rear differential oil changes and the transmission fluid change. Now, even though the Murci is a V12 Lamborghini, the process is similar to that as just any other regular vehicle. So these 3 jobs might be something you might want to take on your own. We'll start with the front differential, and it's very straightforward. If you've worked on any other front differentials, you'll have no problem with this. It is a Lamborghini, but there's nothing very special about it. It simply has a drain and a fill, just like all the others. It uses around 1 liter of lubricant. The spec is 75W90. Everyone has their own personal preference. I like Mobile 1 with the limited slip additive. I'll usually take oil sampling for the first few services. That way I can get a trend of what's going on with the wear metals. But after that, if everything looks good, unless there's some other problem like I'm hearing audibly or suspicious leak, I'll just let it roll. And when the oil drains, I'll take a visual and just look for any contaminants or metal chunks, something alarming that I would have to look into further. The first thing we'll do is pull the fill plug to minimize the splash when draining the oil. To get to the plug is a little tight, so I took a snap-on 14mm hex socket, removed it, and cut it off. This fits in there, and then I'll use a 14mm gear wrench to go ahead and spin back out the plug. Then just push the temp sensor harness up to clear the path for the oil, spin the plug out by hand, and let it drain into the pan. The front differential oil has 2,000 miles and 3 years on it, and you can see from the condition in the light, it's still very clear and in very good condition. The drain plug has a very nice feature. It has a magnet built into it. This way, if there are any large contaminants floating around, it'll get caught in the magnet. All you see here is some very light metal particles, and that's very, very normal to see on the diff with this amount of miles on it. I thoroughly cleaned the magnet and the plug and replaced the copper washer. Something to note is that all the plugs on the Murci from Lambo have a thin bead of Teflon paste between the crushed copper washer seal and the plug. I always just put it back the way it was. Now we'll just tighten down the plug. We're ready to start filling the differential. It's worth noting that I always like to put the Teflon paste on the fill plug before I start filling, because as you're filling the oil, once oil starts coming out of the differential case, you want to be able to pull that pipe down real quick and put the plug up. The housing's full. We have oil coming out of the fill hole, so we'll spin the plug in real quick. Then take our 14mm socket and go ahead and tighten it down. Now moving to the rear differential, we'll again pull the fill plug using a 22mm socket with the wobble extension. We'll use the same 14mm hex with 14mm gear wrench to remove the drain plug. The rear differential has the same amount of miles and time on it as the front oil does, but you can see that there's much more metallic, much more wear. That's normal from what I see because of the rear bias. The rear always takes more abuse, but there are no metallic shavings or large metallic particles that would indicate that a failure is occurring. As you can see, the drain plug on the rear has a magnet as well, and what we're seeing is evidence that coincides with what we saw in the pan. After we clean the plug, put the new copper washer on and apply the Teflon paste, then we go ahead and use the 14mm hex again to go ahead and cinch down the plug. The plug on the rear differential is not pipe thread like the front. It has a copper washer. So we want to go ahead and change the copper washer and add the bead of silicone paste. Then we will go ahead and start filling the rear differential. The rear differential takes around 2 liters of fluid, and we will use again the 75W90 Mobile 1 with the limited slip additive. Now that oil started coming out of the fill hole, we can go ahead and tighten back up the plug. Moving forward to the trans, there's only one thing that's rather rare, and that is on the front of the case of the transmission, there's a transmission filter. So we'll go over pulling that out and taking a look at it. Other than that, all there are is the usual drain and fill. First thing we'll start with is again using the 14mm hex with a gear wrench to pull the fill plug out. The fill plug has a magnet on it, so we can take a close look, and all we see there are fine metal particles, no large contaminants that would be alarming. Now we're ready to use the 14mm hex with the gear wrench again to go ahead and pull the drain plug. Now we're ready to use a 13mm socket to pull the 2 nuts holding the filter housing cover. If I have any difficulty pulling the cover off of the filter housing, what I'll do is put the nuts back on the studs. Then what I'll use is a plastic scraper so I don't mess up the housing or the cover, and I'll hit it with a plastic hammer. That draws it back very slowly, just delicately and lightly hit it. Once the cover and filter are free, you can pull down the nuts and then just gently pull back the filter. We inspected the fill plug when we pulled it and everything looked good. It is the same situation with the drain plug. No large metal fragments, just some fine metal which is characteristic of normal wear. The nice feature is the transmission filter. Right here it is directional, so I marked up before I pulled it out. But as you can see here, the screen is clean, everything looks good. Nothing to indicate that any component is failing. The transmission fluid has around 800 miles on it. I always change the transmission fluid from 800 to 1,000 miles. Since I got the car, the oil always looks contaminated. It basically gets dirty much faster than any of the other lubricants on the car. At first I thought that I was having some sort of failure, so I started oil sampling. But what I found out was it was just the wear characteristics of the transmission. It was very consistent, which would indicate that no component was failing. So I did try some other lubricants, and basically what I came up with was the Redline 75W90 NS did have the least amount of wear. After everything's been inspected, we want to take the filter over and clean it out very good with solvent. Inspect everything. Pay close attention to the O-rings. You want to make sure they're in good shape. If they are not, definitely need to replace them. After that's done and everything looks good, you want to lubricate both O-rings with just a little bit of oil or grease. Then right here down in this crack where the flange meets the filter, what you want to do is run a very, very small amount of silicone. That way, it'll be extra insurance that you won't have a leak. We can now go ahead and put the filter back in. Don't force it. You just want to go in very gently. Once the filter flange is down, then we want to go ahead and put a drop of blue Loctite on each stud. We can bring the nuts up and go ahead and start pulling them down. With the nuts back on the housing, we're ready to torque it down to 25 Newton meters. After we clean the magnet and the plug, we replace the copper washer with a new seal, lay the thin bead of Teflon between the plug and the copper washer. Then we put the plug back in the trans, torque it down to 45 Newton meters. With the fill plug prepped with a new copper washer and the thin bead of Teflon paste, we're ready to start filling the transmission with oil. Now that oil is coming out of the fill hole, we can go ahead and send up the fill plug. Now we can tighten down the plug and go ahead and check for any leaks. I hope the information in this video will save you time and money if you have the skill set. If you like what you saw, please hit the thumbs up. If you'd like to see more, tag the subscribe button. Thanks, and I'll see you next time.